I want to get your thoughts now on what the effects are going to be of this settlement. We talked a little bit about how it's not a legal precedent, but it's probably going to have serious effects, right, on the industry?
I think it has the potential to have serious effects. I mean, so, again, the I think one of the big issues here is the fact that the Supreme Court did not intervene. It could have. I mean, let's say the insurers decided not to settle this case, went to trial. Let's say a verdict was returned. At that point, the insurers could have appealed that verdict up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court could have stepped in and said, actually, yeah, you know what, this whole thing violates the PLCAA. But, I think until the Supreme Court weighs in, we are going to see this as the blueprint going forward. And it's not going to be in every state, right? I mean, there are certain conditions that have to be met here. You've got to have some sort of marketing and advertising law on the books that you could use. You've got to have an anti-gun attorney general or anti-gun plaintiffs attorneys. We're seeing, because we're seeing this in New Jersey right now, where this was started by Gruel, the former AG, and it's now the new AG. I'm blanking on his name. Is continuing this same sort of effort against Smith & Wesson, basically using the marketing laws to do a document dive into Smith & Wesson's practices. We're also seeing the government of Mexico suing 14 different gun makers right now in federal court in Boston, basically alleging that the gun makers are marketing guns and cartel members are picking up on the advertising. If it weren't for the darn, advertising, the cartel violence in Mexico wouldn't be nearly as bad as it is. So there are some opportunities, I think, for the court to step in here if either of those cases proceeds. Like right now, I think the government of Mexico case is before a federal judge who's trying to decide if this case is going to go forward at all. If the judge does allow this to proceed, then again, we're going to get the opportunity for the Supreme Court to eventually weigh in. And I think that's what needs to happen here. Because if you go back and you read the actual language of the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, when they talk about these, marketing and trade practices, I don't think that Congress really meant that that was just an open-ended invitation, for if as long as they're advertising, well, you can sue them for any crime that was committed with their gun. It seemed to be like they were talking about, really deceptive advertising, things that violated the law, not something that somebody might thought uncouth or something of that nature. Unfortunately, I don't see Congress revising the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act anytime soon. So it ultimately is going to be up to the courts. And until the Supreme Court says something, the gun control lobby has a green light right now to try to use these laws in places like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, to continue to go after the industry. And, I think they're going to continue to try to use the marketing argument, the advertising argument. But we've also seen them try to use the argument, Steve, in the past couple of years. Brady, I know, for instance, did this in a lawsuit filed in California, arguing that the Protection of Lawful Firearms and Arms Act should not apply to lawsuits in which AR-15s were used because AR-15s are like machine guns. Basically arguing that there's like an inherent design feature that makes these guns unsafe, right? It makes them readily converted to machine guns. And so therefore they should be covered under the NFA. They shouldn't be sold to civilians. So you're right. It's part of that kitchen sink strategy. They're throwing anything and everything up there and seeing what might be able to sneak past and get through the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. And I think they're just going to be more emboldened to engage in that strategy until the courts step in and say, no, you can't do this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I don't, given that it's a settlement and not a ruling, I don't know that it's going to have any sort of practical legal implication in future cases like this. But the fact is, it's going to absolutely encourage gun control activists to file more cases like this and to try and follow this exact same path because it's the first one to be this successful. And so you're going to see a lot more of this. I mean, even just getting to discovery is a big deal for them in these cases because then you can go through and go through all the documents that whatever gun company has. And they obviously view this and they talk about it the same way as when the government went after tobacco companies and their marketing and so forth, and how they restricted that industry. They want to do the same thing with guns. And yeah, I mean, it's not, the Sandy Hook settlement is interesting because there's nothing really unique about what they did other than that they were fairly successful with it in the end. But that, I think, has a practical implication of causing more suits like this to be filed. And then also, do you think that this is going to raise insurance rates for gun manufacturers? Perhaps insurers will look at this settlement and want to demand a higher premium to insure these makers in the future. Do you think that's a potential immediate impact as well?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not an actuary or an expert on the insurance industry, but I mean, that stands to reason that might be, one of the reactions from the industry. Although, again, it was the insurers themselves that ended up settling in this case. And I think you talked about this in one of your pieces at the Reload, that a gun company that is still in existence, I think is going to have motivation to keep fighting, right? To not settle, to actually go to court. And again, we're seeing this right now in New Jersey with the Smith and Wesson investigation. Smith and Wesson hasn't said, okay, we're going to cave. I mean, first of all, they know what the current people who run Smith and Wesson know what happened to Smith and Wesson's reputation, during the Clinton administration. So, there's a couple of factors I think at work that are going to keep the firearms manufacturers in these legal fights. And one is you don't win by caving, but B, the consumer backlash to caving, right? But for the plaintiffs here, for the gun control advocates, I think it's interesting because they do have, I think, an advantage in one way, in that they don't necessarily have to get a big verdict for them to get a win, right? As you say, if they just have access to internal documents that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise, that's a win, right? If they can, drag out these lawsuits for 7 years and force gun companies to continue to pay attorney's fees for 7 years, that's a win. Because a lot of these plaintiffs are operating with the help of gun control groups that providing pro bono legal advice and legal representation. So
I think even when they lose, it's kind of a win in these sorts of cases, because the headlines you get when these cases fail is that the gun company gets, or is the victims' families are forced to pay the gun company for their legal fees, and that's often framed in a obviously in a negative way when it gets covered in the press. You've seen this a number of times where these previous suits have failed, and then the gun companies recover their legal costs, and they end up having to be paid by victims' families. And so you get even that coverage of that tends to be positive, because people feel like that's not, obviously, like you said at the top of this, everyone is sympathetic to the Sandy Hook families because of the horrific thing that happened to them. And, whatever they feel about the gun issue, they might feel good that the victims' families got paid a lot of money at the end of this, because, they deserve some sort of restitution, even if you don't agree with how it came about, right? I mean, and so when a victim's family is forced to pay the legal fees of someone else that they're suing, that can also induce that same sort of sympathetic reaction from a lot of people in the public. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of incentives for why these cases keep happening.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not just a court of law that that this plays out in. It's the court of public opinion as well. And you're right. I think there's some structural advantages given the media environment for gun control groups, in terms of winning the court of public opinion, at least in the larger public. Now, again, I don't know that that's always going to be the case. These are, again, generally very sympathetic individuals. But I don't know that applies to the gun control groups. I mean, that's the thing. I think people have a lot of respect and sympathy for crime victims. But at a time in which, again, we've seen millions of new gun owners embraced their right to keep and bear arms over the past couple of years. We've got, violent crime rates that are skyrocketing in city after city across the country, and more people are turning to their Second Amendment rights to be protected. I don't think that trying to sue the firearms industry into oblivion is actually a strategy that's going to win a lot of hearts and minds for the gun prohibition lobby, quite frankly.